Hey guys, back again for another review of the final season of Game of Thrones, looking at episode 4, The Last of the Starks. Okay, so I really like this episode, despite some pretty glaring flaws, but in general, I enjoyed returning to the intrigue and politics of court life. So let's get right into it with my top 5 moments of the night, starting at number 5 with a scene that may not actually have the significance I think it does, and that's Sansa's actions during the feast held to celebrate their victory. They never directly said this, so I might be overthinking it, but this is how I interpreted the following chain of events. After Dany made Gendry the Lord of Storm's End, Sansa noticed the political maneuver and was upset. Later, she was angry when she saw Dany and Jon looking at each other lovingly. She then quickly stood up and disappeared for a bit. Next time we saw her, she was watching 2 girls hitting on Tormund and Sandor, and went on to comfort the Hound when he rejected the girl. A girl which rolled her eyes the first time Sandor rejected her, as if she didn't want to be there, but then continued hitting on him anyway. To me, it seems like Sansa saw Dany securing political allies, and so went on to gather her northern ladies and sent them to seduce other heroes from the battle, in order to keep them happy, away from the Queen, and to send them home with fond memories of Stark hospitality. A small scheme perhaps, but if this was what they intended, then I think it was a nice, subtle little move to start undermining the Queen's growing influence. At number 4, there's Jon's speech during the funeral pyre for those killed in the Battle of Winterfell. The power of his words as he referenced the vows of the Night's Watch and the raw emotion in his voice where it sounded like he was about to cry for a moment really sold this for me and made Jon seem very much like a kingly figure. At number 3, I chose the moment I've been waiting for since the death of Stannis, and that was Gendry taking up the seat of Storm's End and continuing the Baratheon line. As some of you may remember, I'm a big fan of Robert and House Baratheon, and loved seeing Gendry wield a warhammer last season, invoking his father's friendship with Ned Stark when he wanted to fight at the side of Jon Snow. So I was thrilled to see him made a legitimate son and given a lordship, even if it was a self-serving political move on the part of Daenerys. For the second best moment of the night, there's Tormund Giantsbane at the Great Feast, regaling his comrades with stories of Jon Snow's heroism. Although the scene eventually turned tense when Daenerys grew upset. I loved seeing how honest and fun Tormund gets when he's drunk, yelling in people's faces and spilling his drink everywhere as he celebrated. And finally, for the best moment of the episode, for me it was returning to the cutthroat politics of Westeros, whenever Varys was speaking privately with Tyrion. Given how close the two have become over the years, they're now comfortable enough to be relatively honest with one another, having a candid discussion about possibly removing Daenerys as queen in favor of Jon Snow as king. Although I agree with Varys that Dany would overpower Jon if they were married, I disagree with the dismissal of the idea, as I still think it's the best solution. And when it comes to who would actually be a better ruler, I actually think Dany has more potential, as she clearly has a mind for the ruthless politics of royal life. Jon, on the other hand, is more like Ned Stark and would make a great lord of a holding amongst his own people, but simply does not have the killer instinct to be a feudal king of a large, diverse population. But either way, I love seeing Varys back in the game after taking a back seat for so long while they dealt with the White Walkers. For the best kill of the night, I've chosen the surprise death of the dragon Rhaegal as they flew to Dragonstone. Although I had a lot of issues with this scene in general, which I'll get into shortly, these sort of quick, unexpected deaths are one of the things I love most about Game of Thrones, and was what I was hoping for in the last episode. Instead of spending a good deal of time focusing on the deaths of a few characters, I was hoping that during the Battle of Winterfell, they would go the opposite route, and start killing off characters quickly and brutally without any closure or final goodbyes. Although it didn't happen then, I'm glad it's happening to some degree now. Of course, I don't think every death should be quick and brutal like this one, but in this case it was long overdue and was a great reminder of the danger they're about to face. After being disappointed with how quickly the White Walkers were dealt with, being enraged by the death of Rhaegal suddenly made me much more interested in the approaching battle, especially as Daenerys' chances seemed to be in an ever-worsening position. For the best line of the night, I have to go with Bran during the Stark meeting by the Godswood, when Jon looked at him for advice about whether to tell the truth to Sansa and Arya, only for him to reply, "It's your choice." I love this line, and even though I know Jon didn't interpret it this way, when I heard him say that, all I heard was, "Do you want to be a king?" And so when Jon told them the truth, it really felt like they crossed the Rubicon, and a peaceful resolution between the Targaryens and Starks was no longer an option. Okay, so now getting into my criticisms for the night. There are a few things that bothered me a bit, and the first was Tyrion. Just Tyrion in general. What in the world happened to this guy? Like Sansa, I used to think he was so clever, but ever since becoming Hand of the Queen, it's been one bumbling mistake after another. Don't get me wrong, I recognize his genius and think he would be a great hand during peacetime, but to quote Michael Corleone, "You're not a wartime consigliere." It seems like every piece of advice he gives is wrong, and weakens Daenerys. And for me, the final straw was his emotional speech at the end of the episode. What was he thinking? Did he really think talking to Cersei would help? Especially when he offered nothing of substance except an appeal to her emotions. Just because Cersei loves her children does not make her any less of a monster, especially since it was a very selfish and unstable love. And so pretty much any lingering respect I had for Tyrion's ability as Hand of the Queen died right there. As for Daenerys, I feel worse and worse for her every episode. Despite my dislike of her family, I think Dany as a person has quite a bit of potential. Unfortunately, that potential is not always a pretty sight to behold. I've said before, I think she has the ability to become either Maegor the Cruel or Jaehaerys the Conciliator, two Targaryen kings that represented opposite approaches to ruling the kingdom. Maegor was bent on seeking revenge and eliminating his enemies, while Jaehaerys negotiated and made peace, even granting amnesty to those who fought against his family. But that was in reference to ruling once they were in power. In order to obtain power, I liken Dany's potential to that of Aegon the Conqueror. I think Dany's instincts when it comes to conquest are spot on. She wasn't all that great as a ruler in Slaver's Bay, but she managed to defeat all three of their city-states and raised one of the largest armies in the world. Her instincts to immediately attack the Red Keep when she came to Westeros were also correct, and by delaying and listening to Tyrion, she ended up losing a large portion of her army and gave them the time they needed to set up proper defenses against her dragons. Now, granted, I don't think attacking King's Landing with dragons would have been the morally correct thing to do. I think the morally correct thing to do was come to Westeros, help them defeat the White Walkers, then return to Meereen to rule Slaver's Bay. But to paraphrase Olenna Tyrell, if you're going to be a dragon, then be a dragon. If she really wants to conquer Westeros as a foreign queen with dragons and a foreign army, then she needs fire and blood. Aegon the Conqueror may have been a reasonably enlightened king while they were at peace, but he had no qualms about burning entire cities to the ground during a war, as Dorne unfortunately learned the hard way. So if Dany's gonna be a conqueror, you have to be a conqueror, but she missed her opportunity and now I think it's just too late. Of course, I do think it's possible for her forces to prevail, but I also think Cersei now has an excellent chance of winning, or if not winning, at least killing Dany and Drogon to prevent the Targaryens from regaining power. Now, aside from all that, there was another thing that bothered me, and that was Viserion's death scene. While I already said I loved the unexpected nature of the death, I didn't think the setup was very good, as I can't understand why Daenerys didn't send scouts to check out Dragonstone before sailing her fleet there. I also don't understand why the great spy master Varys didn't have contacts in King's Landing that could warn them about the production and placement of so many scorpions. On top of these larger problems, I also had two minor criticisms, and that was Jon not saying a proper goodbye to Ghost, which, as the owner of two dogs, left me beside myself in rage, and Sansa revealing Jon's secret to Tyrion. For this last one, I'm actually not mad at Sansa, because it was obvious she wouldn't keep the secret, so I blame Jon for being a dummy yet again and being honest when he shouldn't be. That's not to say I don't want Jon to be king, because I do, but if he doesn't want it, then he needs to be politically savvy enough to recognize the type of person Sansa is now, and to keep his mouth shut around her if he has important information she can use. Now, for the final score, I'm going with 8.5 out of 10, as I really did enjoy it, but can't score it higher because of the issues I had. So that's everything for this week, guys. Can't believe there's only 2 episodes left. And from what I understand, the next one is where everything is going down, so can't wait to see it. But for now, don't forget to check out the episode recap already out, and The Thrones Effect, How Game of Thrones Conquered Pop Culture, now available on Amazon as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. See you all next week. Love Game of Thrones? Then be sure to check out the new book, The Thrones Effect, written by a number of respected A Song of Ice and Fire YouTubers, including GOT Academy, Because Geek, Secrets of the Citadel, Grey Area, Ideas of Ice and Fire, History of Westeros, and Smokescreen, with Chapter 5, titled Eye of the Beholder, written by CivilizationEx, exploring the various ways the characters and story can be interpreted, as well as how the audience reacted to their decisions. If interested, click on the link in the description box below, where The Thrones Effect is available as a physical copy, ebook, and audiobook. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like Uther Lightbringer, Jack the Lionheart, Sir Tanner the Skinner, and Sir Bob of the Bowie. If you'd like to help Civilization X, click on the Patreon link, and please be sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and click on the links to see more.